There have been studies done and research done on group bias and like social biases. And it's very interesting because even not that long ago, we didn't have that many societal biases in the United States, and we now have a large amount of them. The research shows that a societal bias is very rarely true until the next generation. If the bias is kept long enough, then it starts to become true. One of the big telltales of that was fame. People thought, oh, people just want to be famous, they just want to be known on all these, shows and stuff. So there was a large assumption that people just want to be famous, people just want to be known. And as the technology has improved and the next generation has come along, we see so many more influencers and people trying to make a name for themselves and turn themselves into a brand than there was before. Now, I personally think part of that is just survival, and that it is not reliable to depend on a corporation to pay you, so you have to depend on yourself to be constantly presenting your value. But there is also this very large push for constantly recording your life and being aware of your life. There was a large assumption that the majority of people, were trustworthy. As that's gone down, people more and more think people aren't trustworthy and that they're not responsible. And it was very interesting that there was a lot of people who thought millennials were not hardworking and that they just wanted to lay about at their parents' house and things like that. When in actuality, millennials have been shown statistically to be pretty hardworking. But in actuality, there's a lot of Gen Z that are hardworking in a way that is not benefiting society. They're very hardworking for themselves, and they're very hardworking when it comes to pursuing causes. They're very hardworking when it comes to soapboxes, but they're not hardworking when it comes to actual labor or commerce or contributing to society in a meaningful way besides ethics. Gen Z is super big on ethics, which is a good thing. It's an admirable thing, but the hard work stops there for a large proportion of them, which was not actually true of millennials, despite millennials getting accused of that. Even to this day, millennials are still what people who are a little older often think of when they look at someone who's in Gen Z. They still think of them as a millennial, when in actuality, millennials are like full-blown way into adulthood. Some of them are like 40s. It's funny how irresponsible they assume millennials are just because the millennials are poor. Way less millennials, like a very harsh amount of millennials, are just not as wealthy as boomers and Gen X. You look at that and it's sad, but the assumption was it was because they weren't working. In actuality, millennials tend to work multiple jobs. A boomer or someone from Gen X could work one job and get the same lifestyle that a person who's a millennial is working multiple jobs and still can't get to. So it's not that they're not hardworking. There are some people in Gen Z who are hardworking, and even in a economic standpoint, but a lot of it tends to lean toward entrepreneurship or self-branding. And again, investing in trying to be an influencer or trying to create some sort of market for themselves instead of joining the societal market as a whole. And part of that, I think, is valid because the system's kind of broken. Who would want to join a broken system? I don't blame them for that. It's not like they're not hardworking because they're just lazy. They're like making a stand. They're going on strike. A lot of them are. And so it's still a wrong perception. But interestingly, the majority of the time, that perception still leans toward millennials, according to statistics. That perception of why even bother has left a lot of people who are millennials and Gen Zs and even younger kind of hopeless. Like there's no hope for them in general. And that's dangerous because, again, research shows that a wide-blown perception can pass to the next generation, and even if it's not true, become true in the next generation. We are teaching the wrong things to each generation, and that's really unfortunate. And I feel like since we have research and data showing that wide-blown perceptions can pass to the next generations, we could use that for good. And an example of that is, in my personal opinion, human rights. Human rights have made pretty, big steps in advancement in this country compared to what they were even 50 years ago. And it is sucky to see some of the stuff against that's gone out from some people who are very loud, but in actuality, when they do the studies, when they do the research, the majority of people, even in other countries, even not just here in the United States, are in support of human rights. And human rights have made strides. We can take big group assumptions and biases and conclusions, and we can pass them on. We can reduce racism. We could reduce inequalities. We could make minorities seem less thrown out to the wayside. We can make things better in the world. If the system's broken, let's do more working together to make it better instead of instilling hopelessness in younger generations. The younger a person is, the harder it is for me to work with them on their budget. And the reason isn't because they're lazy. The reason isn't because they're throwing their lives away or something like that. It's because they feel like it's kind of pointless anyway. Why bother trying? Climate change is going to affect them in a bad way, and they feel like they can't even afford to think about having like a family or children or something like that. They can't even pay off a student loan. How are they ever going to have a home and all of the family stuff? Like, they feel a genuine sense of hopelessness. Oh, this budget's not going to actually accomplish anything, so why even try? And that perception, I keep encountering it in people who are Gen Z, and it breaks my heart. Like, it really does. It is so hard to see that hopelessness and to understand where it's coming from. It's coming from a very real place. Growing up, seeing your parents who were millennials struggling and working all the time, trying so hard, and it just never being enough, I can see how that would instill hopelessness for sure. I mean, my parents struggled so much with money when I was growing up. I didn't even consider it was a possibility to not have to live that way for 2 decades. That's terrible. Like, that's so sad. And I'm not the only one. And I'm not even Gen Z. I'm millennial. I didn't have kids. I've had a hand in helping raise 6 children, but none of them were from me. And I look at the hopelessness in trying to help younger people with their budget, and it's just something that I don't see being addressed very much by financial gurus and stuff. Not to bash anyone, because there are some decent things that anyone can say, including this person. There are some decent things and suggestions and advice that can come from Dave Ramsey. But recently, I watched him just harp and go on and on about, oh, parents shouldn't let your kids come back and live with you. You're just not letting them face hardship, and they're never going to grow up, and they're just going to be forever stuck in childhood. And while I do recognize that we have lost the ability to teach self-regulation and emotional stability and regulating to kids, and it is very obvious because of the rampant rates of emotional dysregulation in millennials and Gen Z and even younger. On the other hand, the financial and economic hardships only add to that problem, shoving someone into that financial hardship when they have no capability of getting out of it just means they're going to be living out of their car, or they're going to be homeless, or in shelters, or living in a hotel room, or whatever it is. They're going to put themselves in dangerous situations where they could end up on drugs, or they could end up being, sexually assaulted. They can end up in not healthy situations. And while Dave Ramsey makes it sound like they are princesses and princes living with their parents, and that they are living it up and having an easy time of it, it is a very embarrassing thing to have to confront that I can't just be an adult on my own, and that I need help, and that I need to go back with my parents. It makes a person feel ashamed. It is not an easy thing to ask for that help. It is not an easy thing to confront that I just can't do it. And him acting like essentially the kids that are in need of that, who aren't even children, by the way, they're adults. They're adults who've already been trying to manage their life, already been trying to work hard, already been trying to go to college and do these things. Him acting like the parents are like just spoiling their child by buying them too many toys, by letting them come live at home. It's like the same attitude, and it's not accurate. Almost no one I've ever met in my entire life who's had to live with their parents has ever lived in that way at all. And quite frankly, like half of them pay some sort of rent. My family, for example, I am one of many kids. I am the only one who has not had to go back and live with parents at some point. And quite frankly, I probably should have. If I had been making better decisions, I would have. But I was too ashamed to ever consider doing that. Almost all of my siblings who have gone back to live with my parents have paid some sort of rent, simply because my parents aren't wealthy. On top of that, none of them stayed there forever. They just needed help. Some of them for a few years, some of them for, less than a year. But it can be in life that you aren't necessarily making terrible decisions, you aren't necessarily doing everything wrong, and yet you still end up in a place that makes you feel ashamed. People who act like they are lazy bums for being in that situation are not helping. They're making it worse. They're adding to the general perception of hopelessness, of why even bother? It's pointless anyway. Everyone's just gonna think I'm a loser no matter what. I don't have my life together, so obviously I'm a failure. I'm just gonna be a failure. No one thinks I can do anything anyway, so why try? And if you are someone who has that perception, please believe me that that is not the truth. That is a widely accepted assumption. If you are, say, in your mid-20s and you don't have it all together yet, you tried to live on your own and you got laid off, say from the tech layoffs. The tech layoffs are not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. You followed a career path that looked like it was going to be a good career path. I mean, look how many companies in the S&P 500 are big tech companies. You thought you were doing a good thing, pursuing that computer science degree. And you got laid off at no fault of your own, simply because they wanted to cut costs and don't care about humans. They're a corporation, they care about profit. You found that you couldn't pay for your rent. You found that you couldn't keep the lifestyle that you had had. You kept applying for jobs, 30 to 100 jobs a day. Algorithms didn't like your resume. For whatever reason, you didn't get picked up by any companies, even the ones that you got an interview with, even the ones that you had multiple interviews with, because almost none of them do one interview anymore. You tried your freaking hardest, and your severance ran out. Your savings isn't going to be enough. And do you really want to throw all of your savings away waiting a few more months, trying to pay this rent still? Or do you want to ask your parents for help? You don't want either of those options in actuality. You wish it was different. You aren't lazy. You're trying to find work. You're trying to do the right thing. You are working so hard, pouring hours in every week trying to get a job, unpaid labor, just trying to get the job in the first place. And it's not working out. It's not your fault that the system is broken. And if you need to ask for help, don't be so ashamed that you don't do it. Don't be so hopeless that you just flounder and sink. Don't accept the widespread misconceptions and assumptions that aren't actually true. There used to just be a perception that people weren't trustworthy, and it turned into an actuality the next generation down. That people were focused on themselves, independence only, not contributing to families, not contributing to communities, not caring about other people as much as themselves. That used to just be a misconception. If you look up the research, if you look at the truth of how it works, we can have widespread assumptions that can be good, that can be positive. And one of them I really, really wish that we could just widely accept is financial education. One of them I wish we could fully just widely accept is that each of us matters. Each individual person matters. One of them I wish widely we could just accept is that the future does not have to be a dystopian nightmare, a catastrophic horror, a meltdown of the whole planet. These things don't have to happen. It is not inevitable. It is not hopeless. Good things can and will happen in your life. Please don't give up. Life has bad things that happen in it, but if you stay alive long enough, change happens. Don't give up, please. Because the widespread assumptions are not always true. But it's like a placebo effect. If you believe it enough, it can still work out that way. So don't give up. Please don't give up.